Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to my channel where I seek to provide to you Oracle-related content for your personal and professional development. And certainly, if you do like content like this, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and please share with your friends. So in one of our recent videos, we worked on creating a physical standby database. And in that process, we had to duplicate our production database to be used for a standby database. So today, I actually want to talk and focus a little bit more on how to duplicate an Oracle database using RMAN. Now, certainly there are questions as to why. Why is duplicating a database important? So now, if you've been a DBA for any length of time, you certainly do understand that we have several environments. So we do have a production environment, and I certainly would draw some things here so that we kind of illustrate a little bit what we're doing. So let's go ahead and draw that. And at the same time, I'm just going to start creating two environments here. And at the same time, I'm going to add something that looks like a database. And I would certainly let's add this one to this side too as well. All right, and then of course I'll add some text to it so that we kind of understand exactly what our environments are looking like. So in here, let's assume we have a production server. If you've been riding with me on this channel, we have a primtst server.local domain, and for the purposes of this exercise, let's call it our prod server. Now, at the same time, I want us to consider a new server here called a test server, tst-serv, or let's test serve. And we would call it our test server. Now, it doesn't really matter what versions of Oracle databases are running on this, but for the sake of simplicity, we'll leave it at this, right? So we have a primary server and we have a standby server. Now, we do have on our primary side our database called primtst, and that's running on 19.3.0, which is our base release. And on this side, what we are trying to do is create a test database, primtst, still, of course, running on 19.3.0. So this is kind of the scenario that we want to replicate. Now, why are we having a test server in many different environments that you work at? What you would notice is you have the production environment, and then you have lower environments, what we typically call the lower environments. And in the lower environments, you have different types of databases, of course, of different levels of importance. So you have the QA, you have test, you have dev, right? And depending on your organization, your configuration might be a little bit different. So what we are trying to do here is we want to make sure that we create a test server. Now, why do we really need that? Now, certainly within organizations, you have servers in lower environments, databases in lower environments that are used for a variety of purposes. As DBAs, you might want to test implementation of new technologies. You might test your upgrades. You might test your patching. You might do some work on some configurations, see how it's working before you actually deploy those in production environments. So there is a need for us DBAs to understand how to create databases to be used for the purposes of testing. And so in this exercise, we are going to do that. So we are going to create a primtst database on a separate server we would call test server. Now, I already have this server. And if you do have just the primtst, if you've been writing with me on this channel and have just the primtst server, there are other videos that I have made that show you how to clone existing servers, change host name, change IP addresses, of course, and make them a whole different server. So so that is the purpose of this exercise. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, I'm certainly going to open up my mobile XTEM. I do have my primtst server, which of course, and let me, of course, make this a little bit more friendly and make the characters a little bit bigger. And I certainly do have a test server that I also created, that I cloned from the primary server. So here, my host name is primtst, and my IP address host name minus I is 192.168.56.101. And the test server, I'll run the same commands, host name and host name minus I, certainly to get me 192.168.56.102. Now, the primary method of duplication we are going to use. Now, there are two main methods you can use to duplicate, right? And there are different flavors as to each one that you're trying to use. But you're either going to be duplicating from an active database, or you are going to be duplicating using backup-based duplications, right? In an active database, you're actually copying the database that is up and running. You don't need to use the backups. But with a backup-based duplication, you would have to use the backups for the databases. You would have to find a way to transfer those backups to the test server. And of course, you would start using things like the set until, like the until clauses in the RMAN blocks, right? When we certainly do have an example, when we're doing a point in time recovery, we would certainly work on RMAN blocks that that certainly use the until clause. But for now, what we are going to do today is we are going to duplicate our primary database, our primtst. If I cut my tnsnames.ora tab, I have a primdb, which is what I illustrated in this exercise. Our primdb database, we are going to actively duplicate that and create a primtst database. Okay, so let's make sure our database is up and running. So let's set our environmental variables .ora env primdb, and then let's go SQL plus as sysdba. All right, so and then let's confirm that with a select instance name status from, I can add version to it as well, from the $instance. All right, so our primdb is open and it's running. Now, because we are working with databases on two different servers, communicating with those databases, of course, would go through a listener. So let me exit here, and then I will check to see if I have a listener running on this database that services primdb. So lsnrctl status listener. So I have a listener called listener that is running, and it services a primdb. So for us to be able to do duplication, of course, there are some things that we are going to need to do. First of all, I want us to understand, let me take you back to this diagram and explain a little something for you. There is what we call duplication or cloning, and there is what we call refresh. Now, cloning is kind of different from refresh. Cloning is creating an exact copy of that particular database, maybe a production database or any other database. If you're cloning that database, then technically you're creating an exact copy of that database. Now, if you are refreshing and we clone first, get a second database, and then, we use it for whatever we're using it, testing, QA, stage, whatever it is we're using. And then after a while, information on that test database becomes obsolete, becomes stale. And there is a need sometimes for developers to request for fresh information. They want you to refresh that lower environment, that test environment. So subsequently, we are going to be doing a video on how to refresh that. This is just a video on how to duplicate. All right, so let's get back to our servers here. So, and again, copying that database copies everything, right? All the users, all the schemas, everything in that database as we clone them is going to be an exact copy as we are cloning, we are duplicating using from an active database. When we are refreshing, it could be a whole database that we are going to refresh, or it could be particular schema objects that we are choosing to refresh. Now, your choice of method is going to vary at that point. If you're still going to use RMAN to refresh, or you're going to use Oracle's import-export utilities, data pump, to execute that task. All right, so so let's go ahead and do a few preparations, right? on this side, let's make sure that we have, all right, we don't have any database running on this side. A cat Etsy or a tap doesn't give us any database, and a PS minus EF, and we grep pmon process. We don't have any pmon processes running on this side as well. So the first thing we want to do is, first of all, we want to determine the name which we did. We are going to be refreshing, duplicating primdb into primtst. One of the things that you have to do with duplication, especially if you're doing remote connections, is the password file. In the password file, so usually the password files are stored in the Oracle home DBS folder. So let's cd to our Oracle home / DBS folder location. And in here, we ls minus L to see what we have here, right? So, or to make it easier, let's ls minus L ora password star, because this is typically the format of a password file, ora password, and then of course the service identifier for that database. So we have 3 databases running on this server, each has a password. So ora password would be what we want to copy over, because the databases would have to have the same credentials for sys and sys backup. So let's go ahead and copy that over to the next server. So I'm going to scp the Ora password for primdb, and I'm going to send it over to, I'm going to connect as Oracle on this server. Now let's make sure we get the IP right. 192.168.56.102. And I want to put that in the same location. So I had printed my working directory up here. So that would be on the same location on this server. But at this time, I would rename it, because I'm creating a new database. On this side, I would call it Ora password for primtst. So that is what I plan on doing. So this is the first time that it's establishing that connection. I'm going to say yes, because I want that to be done. Oracle's password, I would give it Oracle, and it copies my file over. Now let's go over to the test database and verify that. So let me cd into that DBS location, U01 app Oracle product, and this up to this point is the Oracle home, and then of course the DBS location, and then I do an ls minus L, and then I see an Ora password file that has been copied over. So that is the first step. The second step is we have to establish connectivity between these 2 servers. And these 2 servers in terms of database connectivity. So, and most importantly, because I already have connectivity, TNS files, listener.ora files configured on the primary server, I have to do those for the test server. So our connectivity files are located in our CD, in our Oracle home, in the network admin location. So I missed something. Oh, I have not set environmental variables here. So that explains why. So I probably just passed the whole path. It doesn't know what Oracle home is because I don't have any environmental variables set over here. Network admin. So when I go into this directory, I do have a listener file. I do have a tnsnames file. Because I cloned this, I wouldn't be surprised to see these TNS and listener files looking like the primtst server listener files. So let's start off with the listener. Let's VI into the listener.ora file. And okay, I do have a listener.ora file here configured properly. So the host, now if you see on this side, let me see here, cd, this should work, Oracle home, because I have environmental variables set. And then I cut the contents of my listener file. So I see here that the address on the host doesn't necessarily take the IP address. I can leave it like that. It doesn't, it doesn't stop us from doing anything because it can resolve that name when it pings. But I just want to keep things consistent. So on this test server, I certainly want to make sure that I have the same configurations just to keep it consistent. So I would tap the I key. I could use the IP, I could use the server as well. So it doesn't really matter. I'm just being picky. All right, so here, let's do test serve, okay? And then I would save that. One of the things I would do when I get the listener up and running is to create what we call a seed listener. So a static entry for that database. I can add that here, but I typically don't like to type those entries because the formatting is a little bit on the strict side. So I would use a net manager so that I can get my seed entry in there. All right, let's VI into the TNS names and then make an entry for that. So from here, if I cut the contents of my TNS names, I want to make sure that I have entries for both of the primdb and the primtst.db, which has to also be on the primary side. So I, prior to this, have formatted this. So I would copy just this to, this is the original entry for the primdb. This is an entry that I added from the primtst.db. And if you notice, the host is pointing to the test server. So I will copy this. And if you don't have this, you have to make this entry in both TNS names. That way they are able to resolve themselves on each server. So I would hit my I for insert, paste the primdb entry, which is the primserv, and it has a service name of primdb, and the primtst entry, which is on the test server and has a service name of primtst. All right, so let's go ahead and save that now that we have those two entries. Now, I want to use the net manager. In order to use the net manager, I have to source my environmental variable. So I would go ahead and export my Oracle home equals, we all know where the Oracle home is, U01 app, Oracle product 19 up to DB home 01. That would be our Oracle home. I want to export my path variable as well. And you've seen us set these environmental variables in previous videos. So I would take the value of Oracle home. On the path variable, I want to add the Oracle home bin location to the path variable. And of course, our existing path. So at this point, if I say which net manager, it should be able to tell me it's going to invoke net manager to run from the 19C host. So I want that to happen so that I can set a static listener entry for the primtst database. So I go over to listeners on my net manager command interface, sorry. I click on listener. Right now it's on listening locations. I'm good with listening locations. So I want to change from listening locations to database services. And then I add a database. Now the global database name will be primtst, and the seed will be primtst. So that's what I want to do. Now, if I click on add, it's going to think I'm trying to add a second database. At this point, I could just choose to file, save network configuration, or if I click on the X, it's going to prompt me if I want to save this, and I would say yes, save. Now, now that we've done this, if I cut the contents of the listener.ora file, you would see here that it has added a seed listener entry for primtst, which is exactly what I was trying to achieve in the first place. Okay, so now that we have a listener set up, listener entries set up, our TNS entries set up, I want to make sure that these are able to talk to each other, right? Because I already sourced my environmental variables here, I can run a tnsping. So if I run a which tnsping, it is a utility that's going to run from the Oracle home bin, right? So I want a tnsping for primtst first. Oh, the listener is not up and running. I forgot I have to start that, right? lsnrctl start listener. Let's start our listener here so that we are able to run our tnsping. Very important, the listener has to be up and running. So tnsping primtst. So it resolves primtst. This is the name resolution part of it, right? Using our TNS names. So tnsping primdb. And I would do the same on the primary server. So let's go ahead and because we already have our environmental variable set up, let's do which tnsping, and it's going to run a tnsping from a 19C hole. So tnsping primdb, it resolves that, of course, and tnsping primtst, it resolves that, of course. So we have been able to establish Oracle Net connectivity for our primdb and our to-be primtest.db. All right. Now, in order for us to proceed, what we do is let's go back to our Oracle Home DBS folder. Oracle Home DBS. And if you want to see that working directory, it's our Oracle Home DBS. This is where we have our initialization parameter files and our password files and our SP files, right? So we don't have an init file for the database that we are trying to create. We have a password file. So we are going to VI and create an initialization parameter file, which is the init followed by primtst, which is init followed by the seed, the service identifier for that database.ora. So that's what we are going to create. And the only thing I would put in this initialization parameter file is the DB name. That's the only thing I want to put in there. So I open this up, insert, and then the only parameter I want to put in here is a DB name equals primtst. That's all I need. I'm going to save that file the way it is. And I have an initialization file. Let's view the contents of that file. Initprimtst. All right, so our DB name, initprimtst. So now that we've done all of that, one of the things, if you are duplicating a database, there are certainly some directories that you need to have. And most importantly, the Oracle base admin directory, where audit logs are going to be logged in the process of the database creation. So if we cd to our Oracle base, let me just do, okay, let's do a print working directory here because I want to come back to this directory here in a little bit. But right now, let's cd to our U01, or let's just go ahead and make that directory. Make dir U01, make dir minus P, so that it creates a parent, of course, and subdirectories. U01 app, Oracle, admin. So under the admin, I want to create a folder for primtst. And within that folder, I want to create the adump directory, adump. If we don't have the Oracle admin primtest adump, our duplication is going to fail. So we go ahead and create that directory because we need it. All right. All right. So right now, print working directory here. So I think at this point, I'm ready to duplicate. I hope in the course of duplication, I haven't forgotten anything, right? So let's set, of course, the right environmental variables here. So we already have, let me do a history. Let me just go ahead and export our right variables here. We already exported up here, but it's always good practice to do that. And let's export our Oracle Home. Let's export again our path variable, and then I'm going to export the Oracle SID. And then of course I export the final thing, which is our Oracle SID, which is going to be our primtst. So primtest. So these are the three variables that I'm going to export, and I'm going to invoke SQL Plus as sysdba. So I'm connected into SQL Plus into an idle instance. Fair enough, right? So I want to make sure that I start up in no mount and point to the P file, right? Now I have an initialization parameter file. I don't have an SP file. That initialization parameter file is located in the default location where parameter files are located. So the initialization parameter file is located in the DBS directory. So if you're familiar with how to switch from Linux to from SQL to Linux, you can use either the exclamation sign or you can type a host so that it understands that you're running a host command, host ls-l. Now this location, host pwd, host print working directory, I am in this location, and an ls-l in this location shows me that I have an initialization parameter file for primtst, with whose environment I set up here. So if I go ahead and issue a startup no mount, it is going to start up this instance in a no mount stage using the initialization parameter file because we don't have an SP file. But just as better practice, I always kind of like going the whole 9 yards. So start up no mount, specifying the location for the P file to where I currently do have that P file. So U01 app all the way DBS, and the initialization parameter file I want to use is initprimtst.ora. So I'll go ahead and start that instance in no mount. Now, of course, I cannot go beyond the no mount stage because if you're trying to mount an instance, you certainly need a control file. We don't have it. The only parameter we have here is the DB name. Now, that being done, I am going to exit out of SQL, and now I am going to connect to both databases using RMAN. So I can simply just do an RMAN, and then I do kind of like an RMAN, connect to target sys Oracle as a password at primdb, and then the auxiliary. So I'm connecting to two databases at the same time. Now you can do this in 2 steps. You can go to RMAN and then do a connect target and then connect auxiliary. Now, if you have an RMAN catalog within your database environment, then you would have to connect to your RMAN catalog as the final step, okay? So auxiliary database, I certainly do have the same credentials, Oracle. And from a security perspective, this may not be, and again, just while thinking about that, if I want to show you guys something, I want to show you guys the right way. Let's go ahead and just do RMAN. Let's connect it to RMAN. And then let's connect, because I don't like passing the passwords on the command line. Because of course, if somebody comes behind me and runs a PS, it's going to show that person, or a history, is going to show that person all the commands I wrote on. Of course, our password is no longer safe, right? Connect target sys at primdb. Now, when I do this, it's going to prompt me for the password for sys, right? Target database, then I hit Oracle. All right, it's connected to the target database. Now I want to connect auxiliary sys at primtst. And if I do that, it's going to ask for the password, and I hit Oracle. So right now I'm connected to both databases, and this is actually the right way to do it. Otherwise, you could just pass the whole RMAN target sys password at, and then of course auxiliary sys password at. But for me, it's not really the safest. Now, because I have this worked out in this way, I am duplicating from an active database. I don't have any parameters set in the in our test database that we are going to create other than the DB name. So when you're duplicating into a target, you're duplicating from an active database, right? You can actually use a clause in the RMAN run block called the SP file, which means that it is going to copy the parameters from the active database's SP file. Now, this typically happens to be the trickiest part of the duplication, because what you put in the run block for RMAN kind of really determines what method you're going about with your duplication. So, but one thing is clear, I would use a run block, and let's do that. And in my run block, I would say, first of all, duplicate target database to primtst, right? From active database, right? Now, the second thing I'm going to do, so this is, we are duplicating the target database to the name of the target database from the active database. On our next line, I want to use an SP file. So I want to indicate that I want to use an SP file. Now, on the next line, because we are going to be converting the database name, we are certainly going to have to convert the names of the data files as they come along. So what I want to do here is I want to do a parameter value convert, and I want to convert anything that looks like primdb, and I want to convert that to primtst. Okay, so I want to do a parameter value convert. So that is what I'm converting. And then at this time, because now if you're duplicating from a file system, from a server that has the same file system with the destination server that you have, because like we see here, we have the U01 app, Oracle product, everything. Our file architecture seems to be the same. Now, in order to make my duplication easier, I like to use a no file name check. Now, do not use this command if you are duplicating your database on the same servers. Because when you do a no file name check, what typically happens is it prevents RMAN from checking whether the data files and online read log files on the source database are in use when the source database files share the same name as the duplicate database files. It's going to be very dangerous. You can overwrite files if you are duplicating on the same server. Try not to use the no file name check. All right. So this is the end of my run block. I'm just going to close it with the semicolon, and of course close it with because the run blocks of course are in parentheses, right? So I would go ahead and hit enter, and if we are lucky so far, we should start our duplication. And let's wait and see. Hopefully we don't get any errors, because this is kind of really where in my experience I've run into a lot of errors, you know, with my duplication command. Typically, most of the errors kind of happen right about now when executing the memory script. And if we get past this, then I think we should be good. Right about now is where if we have some errors, usually if it's a syntax error, it tells you right from the beginning. Oh, okay. So far that looks good. I just keep my fingers crossed and hope that we duplicate till the end. And just to kind of give you a heads up on what RMAN is typically doing, RMAN simply just goes ahead, creates a control file. After it creates a control file, it restarts the auxiliary instance and mounts it using that duplicate control file, and then creates a duplicate date files and recovers them, you know, with incremental backups and archive redo logs. And when all of that is said and done, it just kind of opens up the database, of course, with the reset logs option. That kind of just gives you in a nutshell what it's doing as we go along. Well, I mean, not necessarily with the reset, but I mean, when you're doing with the backup-based duplication, of course, it does it with reset logs. All right, it looks like we are done with our duplication. Now let's go ahead and check to see Let's exit out of RMAN here. And then let's go ahead and check to see what our database looks like. First of all, let's see if we have an entry in our Aura tab. If we don't have, add one there. So let's VI into our Aura tab. Before we do that, let me do a print working directory so that I can copy what the Oracle home is going to be. And I'm doing this so that I can set environmental variables, of course, using the .ora env. Aura tab. Let's VI into our Aura tab. We don't have any entries here. Let's go down. I will hit I and create an entry for primtst, the database home and end. And I can just say, hey, this was added manually. Added manually. Let's save that. That way, if I .ora env and then I do a print test, I have my environmental variables all set. So if I echo what the value of Oracle home is, it should give me, you know, what my Oracle home is. That's good. So let's SQL plus as sysdba, and let's start looking at this database, right? So show parameter, or let's see here, select, no, let's do show parameter, DB name. So our DB name is primtst. Let's show parameter DB unique name. I'm sure it's still going to be unique name is going to be primtst. All right. So let's select name from the $data file. So we do have, and if we run this same command, you would see that on the primary side, we had our data primdb. Why don't we just go ahead and do that? So let's go into our SQL plus sysdba, run the same command. And you see right here, after our data, it's primdb. Remember, we had the parameter convert, parameter value convert. It converted every primdb to primtst. Okay, so there is it, guys. This is just a quick way. One of the quicker methods to duplicate your database. Now, you can also call it cloning. If you're using other utilities like Enterprise Manager, it could be, you know, just a few clicks to get, you know, a duplicate of a database or cloning a database. So we now have a test database, primtst, on our test server, and we can use that database, of course, for the purposes of testing. We can test patches, we can test upgrades. We can actually, you know, do a lot of different things with the database. Make sure that we, you know, we develop scripts on that and deploy into production. That's what typically gets done in different user environments. Now, in subsequent videos, we would see how maybe we can refresh, carry out a refresh exercise on this primtst from fresh data from prod. Now, if you did like this content, go ahead and like this video. All through the video, down to the right of the video, there is a red subscribe button that floats all through the video. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel and share with your friends. Don't also forget to enable notifications so that you stay informed of new content that we release. Thank you very much for watching, and I certainly would see you in the next video.